Now that you're a dad, the jokes have gone downhill.
I know. I mean, they were never that great to be.
Where do you keep your jokes? In a database?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, man.
I'm gonna keep that one.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the Growing Band Director podcast. My name is Kyle Smith, and joining me is my friend and colleague, Jeff Smith. Our mission is to share practical advice and explore topics that will help every band director, no matter your experience level, as well as music education students who are working to join us in the coming years. Together, we will discuss many aspects of a well-rounded band program, but most importantly, we will discuss concepts that help us all improve our own programs each and every day. Always remember the famous quote by Ray Kroc, "When you're green, you're growing, and when you're right, you rot." Let's get started.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Growing Band Director podcast. This is episode number 84, and I'm with one of my dearest friends for over 20 years, Phil Edelman.
Hi, Kyle.
Phil, how are you?
I'm great. It's been a great conference so far.
So we're at Maine All-State, and you had a great clinic, so I've heard.
Well, thank you.
Yep, more than 4 people went.
Indeed.
That was a good thing.
There were at least 5.
How long have you been in Maine?
I've been in Maine for 7 years now. Yep.
Yep. And your position is?
I'm the director of the School of Performing Arts and associate professor of music education here at the University of Maine. It's a mouthful.
All in one breath.
All in one breath.
You've made a lot of friends here. Sort of made it your home.
I love it here. This is an amazing state. And any of your listeners who might be looking to relocate to a really beautiful place to teach, just get in touch with me. I'll help you find a job.
Yeah. So we go all the way back to the UNH days.
We do.
You were the first musician I ever played tennis with who kicked my butt.
Wow. You know, we don't have time this trip, but next time you come up, let's do it again.
You still play?
Not so much.
Me neither.
Yeah. I'm old and fat now. I got 3 kids. I don't have time for this.
So we're up here at a clinic at a conference, and it's great getting together with professionals.
Yeah.
You know, just like taking the time away from school and just being at the conference. The band is great. You know, Trey Blanco's doing the band.
He is doing an
from
awesome
Butler.
job. Yep. One of the things I really love about this conference right now, especially this year, is there's a lot of young presenters in their first 2-3 years of teaching. We even had some pre-service music educators presenting conferences.
Yep.
And getting to hear their perspectives has been amazing. The future is really bright here.
And they've brought in a lot of great people too.
Yeah.
Peter Boonschaft's here, and Michelle Fernandez is here, and plus all the people in the area who present who are great, like you.
Oh,
so,
thank you. Oh gosh.
like as a director.
Back when I was a real band director, I taught 5th and 6th grade for a little while, sort of as an assistant, helping out our 5th and 6th grade teacher. And then I spent the majority of my time in the field in middle school and high school. And now I'm here. And
you're a tuba player.
And I'm a tuba player. That's right.
God's gift to music education, as Jeff Fries would say.
Indeed.
So as you came to the University of Maine, sort of what's your focus been here?
My focus here has been making sure that our students get a practical music education so that they can go out and be great teachers from day one.
So let's talk about rehearsing a band.
Let's talk about it.
We talk too much.
I think so.
Okay. I think I'd agree with you.
Yeah. So one of the things that I used to do back when I was a real teacher, and now I encourage all of my students to do, is just time themselves, record a band rehearsal, time how much our students are playing versus how much we're talking. It's astonishing how much time we waste.
Yeah.
And especially when the focus is on improving technique or improving your skills or improving an interpretation of something or getting to the nitty-gritty of how to do the thing that you're trying to get them to do, I think we over-explain and we don't let our students make enough attempts.
Yep.
And we don't give them the right feedback, or oftentimes we don't give them any feedback. We just go from one problem to the next. And we become sort of error detection machines, and we treat our students as if they're cogs in this music-making machine that only exists to give us, I don't know, an ego.
A good sounding band,
how we sound. And I don't think that that's how we should treat our students. I think
Yep.
they deserve more from us.
Agreed. So you did a presentation that people have been raving about. Raving.
Fabulous.
And there's a lot of people on the World Wide Webs who were not able to be there.
Indeed.
So we're going to bring that to them today.
Okay.
The title was called, well, still is called, if you give it somewhere else, Rehearsal Techniques, A Focus on Feedback by Philip Edelman,
That's right.
PhD.
PhD.
Yep.
So this came out of my experiences both when I was a public school band director, when I'm out in the public schools, when I'm rehearsing my own group here at the university. I like to think a lot about respecting my students' time and making sure that I'm giving them the information they need without making them feel like they're drinking through a fire hose of useless facts and trivia. And it's just the facts, just what they need to be successful this one time that we can then internalize into this cycle of sort of predictable musical behaviors that, go into the whole cohesive unit of the piece.
And you talk about us talking less,
Yes.
which is funny to say on a podcast because that's all we're going to do is talk. But
Right.
in rehearsal, talking less, because isn't the art of teaching and coaching like taking something that's really complicated and long-winded
Yeah.
and putting it in a short way for people to understand?
Listen, I don't know about you, but I have walked into a rehearsal where I was the tuba player, and I have been told to make something sound like it was melted chocolate rolling down the side of a mountain. I have no idea what that means. So I just said, does that mean louder? Does it mean shorter? Does it mean more articulation? I don't know what that language means. And if we don't all start from the same place with that sort of illustrative language, then you're not really giving your students information that they can put into practice.
Yeah.
So I like to call it A plus B equals C, which I stole from my behaviorist colleagues.
Is that the Pythagorean theorem?
That's A squared plus B squared equals C squared.
Okay, similar. I passed math.
You did.
Okay.
Well done, my friend. So with this, the A is a little bit of edubabble speak, but it's the antecedent, it's the setup. So before we get our students to try to do something that we want to get them to do, we have to give them clear instructions about what to do. And it doesn't matter if this is a 5th grade band student who is putting their instrument together for the first time, or a college student who's about to go into a DMA program and needs some instruction on how to phrase an orchestral excerpt. What we need to do is we need to give the student the frame through which they can attempt their correction. The problem that I see a lot in the field is we give them the information and then we keep talking. And so they lose the information they needed, or they just get inundated with extra information, so they can't do the one thing you wanted them
And sometimes
to do.
we give the information a bunch of times because we know they're not listening.
Yes.
Or we think it's like we're thinking about our kids at home, the 4-year-old who's not listening to us. So you say it 4 different times,
Yep.
and you're training them to not listen to you.
Yeah. Oh, I see you've met my son. That's excellent. Yep. So from my perspective, as a band director, and I'm guilty of this, I'm still guilty of this every single day, right? I lift my arms and I say, okay, we're starting at measure 5, we're ending at measure 7. I just want you to work on the articulation here.
But why did you lift your arms and then say it? Right? Isn't it you say it and then you lift your arms and go?
Right. Yeah. Sorry. I said that backwards. So I give them the instruction, I lift my arms, and then I catch myself and I want to give them one more hint or one more thing to keep in mind. And that's the wrong thing to do, right? As human beings, yes, many of us are blessed with the opportunity and the ability to multitask. Many of us are not. So what I'm trying to do for my students, especially the younger students, is give them one thing to concentrate on, one thing to be successful at, and then we can move on. And then we move on to a bigger chunk and a bigger chunk. Then we recontextualize the whole thing within a section or a movement, depending on the type of piece you're doing. And then those behaviors, those musical behaviors, become internalized so that when they're performing this piece in its whole, they get the thing that you ask them to do.
Yep.
The problem that I see a lot is we give them the frame, we give them okay, this time through, I want you to play beat 3 really short. What does that sound like? Okay, ready? Here we go. Beat 3, just beat 3, sounds like this. Ready, and bop. Great. Now let's add beats 1 and 2 to that. Ready? And 1, 2, bop. Then we give them feedback based on that one specific attempt. Was it too short? Was it not short enough? Was it perfect? Then you can move on. But what we shouldn't be doing is saying, okay, This time through, we're going to do beat 3, but I need you to make sure it's a concert A flat, not a concert A natural, and it's short, and don't forget where you are in the pyramid of sound, and don't forget to watch me as I'm your conductor, and don't forget you have to blend with the second kazoos, right? We just give them so much.
And from those
to think
5,
about.
all I remember is the word kazoo.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. Right. We do this all the time in rehearsal. And a lot of us, I think we do it because we want to get as much done as fast as possible, but it's working against us. We're actually getting nothing accomplished in the long term.
You can only give the kids what they can handle at the time.
Right. And for most, we say kids, but even college students, for most college students, we can handle one correction at a time.
Yep.
So my advice to most of my colleagues is keep your playing sections short and do lots of them. So if you're playing a 16 measure phrase and you're asking us to correct 10 things within that 16 measure phrase, that's going to be your full hour of rehearsal for a lot of people. So for me, what I like to do is I like to go in with my list of things I want to address that day, and I come up with a logical order to address them in. I decontextualize, so I take out of the musical phrase the thing that I want them to do. I might incorporate it into a warm-up. If it's a phrasing thing, I might write it out for the entire band. If I want it addressed just in the melody instruments, there's no reason that the tuba player can't play a melody.
Yeah.
That might be my own personal grievance, but
So yeah, and if a lot of middle schools do this. They're called companion guides, right?
Yep.
And all that is everybody gets whatever you want to work on.
That's
And
right.
sometimes you do it before you even start the piece.
Yeah.
You hand it out with this little score
Yeah.
packet, and everybody can learn theme A and theme B and theme C or whatever.
It's not just middle schools. I do this with my college students all the time. I call it a one sheet, but it's the same exact thing. So a couple years ago, I remember we did Sevens by Hazo. I created the one sheet. It wasn't really one sheet. It was about
Because that with that one, there's like
there's a lot
there's
of
like
stuff
4
going
rhythms
on.
we need. Oh, there's more than that.
There's
Yeah.
a lot.
Yep.
But we all practiced it together, and so when it came time to pass a theme around the band, we all interpreted it the same way. That was a great use of our time. If I had gone through that rehearsal and said, okay, trumpets, your turn, play the thing, and then took us 10 minutes to fix that, and then it was the clarinet's turn, it took us 10 minutes to fix that, it's a terrible use of our students' time. You know, no wonder a lot of students get bored and quit band.
Have you found that there's some pieces where it's worth doing that on, and then some pieces, is it all how difficult it is for the students, or do you find that it's good to do that on for every piece?
I've found that in any piece where there's more than one thing going on, which is most pieces, it's worth it. The only pieces that I consistently don't do that for are chorales.
Yep.
And, you know, there's a lot of other things we use chorales for. But so from my perspective, the A is the antecedent. It's what I tell the students, what we should be telling the students.
Your clear, concise instruction.
Yes. And it should be a, you know, I want you to, or let's try to play that, and then fill in the blank, and you're done. Any extra information you give them after the thing you want them to do is going to negate what you already told them, right? They're going to forget about it, right? We remember the word kazoo, but what did I ask you to do about the articulation?
Shorter.
Yeah. I don't even remember what
I don't
asked
remember
you.
either. I just guessed.
So there's 2 reasons that I think this is important. Number one, if our students don't know what we want them to do or how we want them to improve or the thing that we're asking them to execute, they're never going to meet our standard. We might get disappointed in them, but they don't know when they're being successful.
And even if you say it clearly, with the way their brains are working, they're not going to hear you 90% of the time or understand it or do it. I mean,
Right.
there's been studies about that. They're thinking about a lot of other things at their
Sure.
age. So if you say it clearly, you still have to repeat it throughout the months of doing the piece before it's going to really
Right.
sink in for everybody.
And be consistent, right? This is another reason that I know we're on a tangent now, but this is another reason that score study is just so important. If on Tuesday you tell them to play that theme short, and on Thursday you tell them to play that theme long, we've got some problems. And I've seen that happen a lot too. I mean, certainly I was guilty of it my first few years in the field. So number one, set your students up for success by giving them a clear picture of what you want from them. And number two, it's important because it gives you the credibility with your students that you actually know what it is that you want, right? To me, there's never a good reason to start at the beginning of a piece and go all the way to the end of the piece, unless it's like the rehearsal before the concert. If it's your dress rehearsal, sure, maybe once. But I can't tell you how many times, I'm certain you would never be guilty of this, but how many times I go to hear a band, or I'm judging at a festival, or I'm out doing a clinic or whatever, and the beginning of a piece sounds great. And then it sort of tapers down in the middle, and the end is like a completely different group. And what's happened there? Well,
They didn't get time to work on the end.
Yeah, we start at the beginning every day.
Yeah.
So of course the beginning's great. So what's important to me?
And a lot of times when you put up, okay, we're working on Celtic air and dance today, and then underneath it, you can be like letter D, letter C, articulation, some words,
Right.
because that tells the kids so much about like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Now I'm guilty. Some days I don't do that, but if you can give them little bits of information like that, then sometimes just said by saying, we're working on articulation for the next 3 weeks because we can't tongue as a band.
Right.
All of a sudden, if you focus on that, it's going to get better. Or if they see articulation letter A, I mean, just the intent has already been done.
Right.
Can I ask you a question?
You can ask me anything.
So you talk about being really specific, and as a tuba player, not wanting to hear your melted chocolate going down a mountainside or whatever it was. That sounds like a mudslide
Well, I don't know what it is.
or an avalanche or something. But
It's dangerous.
yet, there's also great teachers who use imagery
Yes.
to describe music.
And as long as everyone is on the same page about what you're talking about, that's great. But the problem that we have is sometimes we use imagery language and not everyone has the same frame of reference, right? Play it the way a Maine nor'easter might sound might make sense to some folks here. But if I go to Ohio and I say that, like no one has any idea what I'm talking about. A lot of times the imagery language is general and not specific enough to be actionable. And that's the problem. So if everyone knows what you mean by play like melted chocolate, great. Maybe there's a melted chocolate sound that you've rehearsed with your band.
Or maybe you live in
before.
Hershey, Pennsylvania, and everybody knows what that is.
Well, I mean, think about some of the common language that we do use. Like, I want that to sound dark. Well, you know what that means for you. I know what it means for me. If I haven't explained to the band that when I say dark, I mean I want the lower sounds to be a little bit more prevalent. I want us to use this type of air. I want us to position our tongues in this position. Then us playing dark is really just a shot in the dark, right? The students are going to try their best to match what you've described. But if they don't have that frame of reference before they begin their attempt, they're not set up for success.
Yep.
So to me, that's the important thing about this. So the antecedent is making sure that the students know what's expected of them. It makes clear to the student not only the what, but also the how, if needed.
And especially for young teachers, that's hard
Oh,
to hear a band has lots of mistakes and go, what do I do?
Yep.
So some of the things that people come across is just pick something. Like if you're going to stop the band, before you stop the band, know what 1 or 2 things you want to go after.
Yep.
Don't stop unless you have an idea.
Yeah.
And then secondly, I forget where I heard this, but somebody said, if you're going to stop the band and you don't know what to work on, just pick something.
Yeah.
Just letter 24, measure 24, and then pick 4 bars. And then just listen to them play that. And then if you're not sure, take away the brass.
Right.
Pare it down until you find something that you think you can make better.
Yeah. For me, I have sort of a hierarchy I like to think about when I'm rehearsing.
Okay.
So if I hear something wrong, but I can't put my finger on it, the first thing I do is check rhythm.
Yep.
Then I check notes. Then I check articulation or style. Then I check dynamic contrast if the dynamics are important within the context of the line. Like the flutes have to be way softer than the alto clarinets or whatever.
Depending on the register and how it's written. And
Exactly.
So people need to know that the saxophone low is loud, but clarinet and flute are soft, and all the things.
And then I go into the idiomatics, right? Like that high D on saxophone, that you're probably gonna have to bring that down quite a bit. Or, you're the 5th of the chord, how do we adjust that to make it work well? But I mean, if we're using poor technique, you can't really get to those points because then you're correcting it one time and it's going to pop right back up.
You know what I think is amazing? If people are looking for something to make a band better, but they're not sure what to say, this works every time I've ever tried it. You could just say, okay, I want you to play these 4 measures, but I really want you to use the best sound that you can possibly make.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden they sound like they're a year older.
Sure.
Just because they're trying to make their best sound. You didn't do anything.
Nope.
And of course, if you said, who wants to be playing with their best sound, we would all raise our hand.
Of course.
But that reminder is a great.
But that as an antecedent is perfect, right? Because students can interpret that. Now, if you have to go into fine detail and say clarinets, your best sound here means you have to use this type of air, whatever, that's fine, but that's a different antecedent. If you're speaking to everyone and say, use your best sound, use what we've taught you to make your best sound, if they can identify what those things are, great. So for me, that's important. The less experienced that a learner is, I think the more specific the antecedent needs to be, right?
Yeah.
You can't tell your 5th grade tuba player, play like Arnold Jacobs, right? Or, make it shimmer.
I have a friend from college, and he says he was told once, he heard somebody told him to emote freely.
Yes.
Right. So, like, especially as, somebody says, like, to a middle school band, I want you to play this, like, super emotional or whatever. Like, sometimes you can tap into that, but then it's like, I don't know. I think Lindsey Boyden said, I don't know, I'm 12.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Tell me what to do.
Oh my gosh.
How about we crescendo on this note and decrescendo on this note?
Yeah. And also, I think oftentimes when we give instruction to our ensembles, we're taking away their voice, and they have some really incredible perspective to bring, even a 5th grader, right? You can say to a 5th grade band, once they've got the notes down, let's try to play this, and we'll crescendo for 2 measures and decrescendo for 2 measures. And then we'll try it another time, and we'll crescendo for 2, or decrescendo for 2 measures and crescendo for 2 measures. Which do you like better, and why? Get them in dialogue with you, gives them ownership over the process, and you know what? They've got some pretty sophisticated musical ideas themselves.
As long as you have classroom management under control. Because if you
course.
don't want all the 5th graders talking.
No, I mean, you need to have a procedure for that, and you need to practice that too, So what I like to think about is, like, if I have one instruction, I need to make sure that I'm giving it clearly the one time so we don't have to keep repeating it. So one example of this is low brass, play louder at measure 4. That's a great instruction. They know who I'm talking to, they know what measure it is, and then I can put it right into practice. Or I could say, low brass, please play louder at measure 4. Oh, and don't forget the articulation, and don't forget your D flats in 5th position. Okay, everyone show me 5th position.
Which doesn't exist.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I could say, that should sound like sunshine sparkling through the trees, which nobody understands.
Another thing that I think is really big is only put your arms up to conduct
Yep.
when you're going to want them to play.
Yep.
How many times we put our arms up
Oh.
and then we speak sentences?
Yep.
So then you wonder, when you put your arms up, why don't your kids put their instruments up?
Makes
So
me-
you've trained them.
Yeah, it makes me crazy as a player, I'll tell you that much. And I've caught myself doing it. I know that I'm a work in progress, and my students know that I'm a work in
We're
progress.
all a work in progress.
So there's a couple of hints that I have with my a couple of arrangements I have with my students. Every year in concert band, I pick one student, usually a percussionist, who's in the back of the room, who's not going to distract anyone because they're behind them. And if I'm speaking for more than 5 seconds, they just raise their hand and get my attention, and I move on.
So it's a visual cue when you start.
It is. I also had a vocal tic when I first started here at the University of Maine. I would and ah a lot when I was giving instructions. And I told my students just that year, if you hear that from me, don't play the next entrance. And it really conditioned me quickly to get rid of that from my vocabulary, because it was a waste of their time.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be in a position where you're comfortable doing that. And I'm okay being vulnerable and whatever. So that was fine. And it was also a really good way for my undergraduate music ed students to see that, just because you have that piece of paper doesn't mean you know everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I would encourage any of your listeners to, if they're comfortable with it, and if they're willing to be honest with their students and themselves about what they're working on, to have your students help you get better.
Can I do a quick tangent?
Sure.
While we're talking about, like, hearing your band and then giving specific feedback, because just that might be the first 10 years of your career.
Absolutely.
Like, figuring out, I mean, you and I can both hear a band now. We'd probably attack things differently from a different angle, but we both have our way of, okay, give me some time and I can fix what I'm hearing.
That's right.
There is a great book by our mentor, Andy Boysen Jr.,
Yep.
called, I didn't plan for this, Rehearsal Techniques something. It's by Chose.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've used this book or not.
I've not.
But basically what he did is he took recordings of these pieces, and a band played They had only one rehearsal, and then they recorded all the segments, and then they did another one near the end. And then, so you can hear a band that's making a lot of mistakes. And then he took a survey of like 50 educators that he really respected around the country, and they listened to each one of those and then gave their feedback as to what they would fix. So people who buy this book and have the audio, and it comes with the 8 or 10 scores, you can listen to this thing and then say, to kind of take the survey, oh, I would fix this, this, and this. And then you can see all these amazing teachers, what would they have fixed?
Right.
And it's I know a lot of music ed places that are using it now, and it really makes it into a game.
Yeah.
But you can hear non-perfect recordings, and you can see what people would have fixed in that scenario. And another thing you can do is go to all states like we're at, go to honor bands, go anywhere, and just when you hear a band, focus on what the conductor's working on.
Yeah.
And then when they fix something, right, okay, they fix this. Oh,
Yeah.
they fix this, and just take notes.
Yeah, and also look for consistent approaches. That makes sense for you. You know, for me, I always work on rhythm first because to me, that's the skeleton of the piece, right?
Mhm.
Everything else gets built off that. And so I have a specific order of musical elements that I attack. And it has, I've noticed, sort of filtered down into my music ed students. So when they're in the field, I'm seeing them do the same thing. It doesn't matter what yours is, as long as you have one, to make sure that nothing's getting left
And I think the
behind.
focus on rhythm, I think if we take that aside for a second, that's really and I agree with you, I do the same thing. If they're not playing the right rhythm, nothing else matters.
Right.
But we're not talking about warm-ups. We're
No.
not talking about chorales. We're talking about fixing a piece of music.
Right.
So I'm taking tone out of it. Because even though we're dealing with, we have to fix tone all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you agree with me or not, but for me, the band's number one thing is tone. I don't care what they're playing. If they don't sound with a good tone,
Right.
that's important. So my number one thing would be tone. But while we're sitting and fixing a section, I'm not always dealing with the tone. You have to deal with the rhythm first.
That's right.
You
That's
agree?
right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. For me, yeah. Because tone I address all the time, every day, at the beginning. And then throughout, I give reminders about tone. But I'm not going to take half of a rehearsal and just work on tone when I have stuff coming up,
Mhm.
right? In that I'm a college band director now, my life is organized a little bit differently. I basically write a rehearsal continuum to the concert, which is not what I would advise my K-12 colleagues to do. You know, you have actual curriculum.
What is that? What is a rehearsal continuum?
That's like, I know that I have a concert in March and my rehearsals begin in January. So January to March is the rehearsal continuum for the first concert. Just that little section of time.
So you plan out every rehearsal
I do.
ahead before the whole thing?
Yeah, listen, you're gonna make fun of me here,
Never.
but you know I'm the spreadsheet queen, right? So anyway, that's gonna stay in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do. I have a spreadsheet where if I have 4 or 5 pieces that I'm going to put on the concert, I assign each sort of a percentage of the overall difficulty. I add up how many minutes of rehearsal I have between now and the concert. I subtract the amount of time that I would use for warm up from that number, and then it calculates for me. Okay, I spent 20 minutes on piece 1 and 30 minutes on piece 3 today, and it will just continuously update to the end of the continuum based on the percentage that I assigned. And I know it's a little overboard, but that's how my life works.
Yeah.
But it works great for me. And you can update the overall percentage as you get closer to the concert if things change. So that's how I organize.
Well, and one of the things that's made you successful in what you're doing is that you're real, like you are you, period.
Right.
And you can fix stuff. And like I said, you don't waste people's time. But you're also not one of these people who can only get in front of a good band.
No.
You know, at any level, any age, and you can make them better. And those people are special.
You know, I think there's a lot to that, but there's also a lot to just being able to get in front of a group of young musicians and make them feel good about being young musicians. It doesn't have to be perfect all the time, as long as it's better than it was 5 minutes ago.
It's about the process, not being perfect.
Yeah, and I don't care if you're in front of a beginning band from the smallest school district in the country, and you have 4 students in band or 2 students in band. If they're improving, you're doing your job. And if they can identify what they improved and it makes them feel good about themselves, you're doing your job. And it doesn't matter what the starting point was, for me at least.
Mhm.
So that's what I love about teaching music, you know?
Yeah.
All right.
Agreed.
So we've done the antecedent thing. The behavior itself, so B is for behavior. I am a behaviorist by training. That's my background. Don't come at me for it.
What is a behaviorist?
So this is going to sound terrible, but I view my students while they're all wonderful, beautiful human beings, when they're in class with me and we're working on musical behaviors, they are big, fleshy bags of behavior that need to be shaped.
Okay.
And so, there's behaviorists, there's constructivists, there's cognitivists, there's all sorts of people that are in between. I'm trained as a behaviorist, so this is where this perspective comes from. I happen to think that this perspective, this perspective for giving feedback works for everyone, no matter what your specific educational bent is. But there are some people who are going to disagree with this, and that's perfectly fine.
So what is a behaviorist?
A behaviorist is someone who shapes behavior through, in the old days, we would have called them rewards and punishments.
Yeah.
Now we call them reinforcements.
Okay.
Please don't think I'm electrocuting my students or anything.
Yeah, give us some
right?
examples.
So some examples. If an antecedent is clear enough and a student achieves what you've asked them to do, a thumbs up is a great reaction to that because they know that they did the thing you asked them to do. If you weren't clear with your antecedent and you give a student a thumbs up, it's going to make them feel good about themselves, but they have absolutely no idea what it's related to or what behavior you want them to continue. So if you give a clear antecedent, then to me, you've got to let the behavior just happen. The behavior is just the attempt. So I told you we're starting at measure 4, we're going to end at measure 8, and I want you to concentrate on the articulation in the 6th measure or whatever, right? I then let the students do it. I give them no more information, and I don't interrupt no matter what happens. So even if they started in the wrong key or, the tempo was off or whatever else happened, if that's not the thing I gave them in the antecedent, I don't talk about it. That might become the next antecedent, but that I don't give them any feedback on it, okay? If you stop, what you're saying is, I wanted you to do this one thing, but that's not what I'm giving you the feedback on. So now they're going, okay, he told me he wanted me to work on articulation. Why is he stopping for key signature? Or why is he stopping for rhythm? We're confusing our students when we do that. This is a huge pet peeve of mine, and I think I've said it once already, but it's inappropriate to start at the top of a piece and just go until it crashes. Like, we all can forecast where those problems are going to be, and we can help our students fix it before it becomes a problem. And crashes happen, but crashes should always be reflected upon with the lens of, did I prepare my students to play that, or did they crash because I didn't do my job?
What if, and I can ask you this because you've done the public school teaching, different levels.
Sure.
So you're halfway through your concert preparation.
Mm-hmm.
It's Friday at 2:00.
Sure.
It's nice outside.
I know this story well. Yep.
They can't talk if they're playing.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens, and they come in and they're crazy.
Sure.
So maybe you do a breathing warm-up to calm them down a little bit. Maybe you have a silent rehearsal. Maybe you have them work on playing as soft as possible to just bring their focus down or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But once you start playing the music, the minute you get to music that causes energy, their energy is going to come back.
Yep.
So is there a place for today, we are going to play the whole program through 3 times, or each piece 3 times, and each time I'm going to give them a word to think about? Or is there a way to manufacture these rehearsals where they're playing a lot and not the approach you're taking because of certain days and knowing your students?
Sure. Back when I was a public school teacher, we did have some run-through Fridays, which, for that exact reason.
Yep.
I don't think it was a great use of my time. I don't think it was a great use of the students' time. You can have a ton of playing with a lot of learning going on.
Yep.
Right? A run-through with no specific aim or goal, that it might be fun for the students, it might be fun for you, but if you can't identify what you've improved or what you've learned at the end of it, I'm not sure it's worth it.
And how do you balance it? I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Sure.
How do you balance it with the kids who say, I came in band to play? Now, obviously, you're not going to talk a lot, right?
Sure.
So that's the plan. But there's also, sometimes they don't have that experience of playing through the piece.
Oh, no, you should definitely do a run-through before your concert. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But a run-through for the sake of a run-through, to me, it's sort of it's the equivalent of you leaving the room and just letting the kids do what they want for a while.
Yep.
And I shouldn't say kids. I should say
Th-
students.
There's also the feedback of if you do something. I've had people say that sometimes if you just do it again,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you prompt them with a couple words, they can fix a lot of their own problems.
Yes.
Because that does happen, even if you're not giving them the advice. So I wonder if there's a little bit of both.
Doing it again, I use that all the time. Do it, but I use it as a reward, right? If clarinets finally played that B natural leap over the break beautifully, I will say, that was amazing. Can you do it again to make sure it wasn't a fluke? And then they do it again, and we have a little celebration. They do it again, we have a little celebration. There's a couple of things happening there. One, they can see that I'm excited for them. They start feeling better about themselves and getting less nervous about that jump over the break. Two, they're getting reps on the jump over the break. And three, when we put it back into context, they can do it consistently. What I didn't do was say, you did it, now let's move on. Because they only did it once,
Mm-hmm.
right? Especially if it's something that they've been struggling with for a long time. So that's my perspective on that. Doesn't have to be anyone else's, but that's my
Okay,
perspective.
that's great.
Yep.
I don't disagree.
Okay.
I don't disagree.
Now, I don't want to give anyone the impression that like I never do a run through, but I try my best not to do a run through until a week or two before the concert.
So we need to hear from the Bangor band people.
Yeah,
You do the same thing with them.
I do.
Yeah, community band.
Yep. They're amazing. Oh my gosh, the Bangor band's so cool.
So if anybody is listening from the Bangor band, let us know if he's lying.
Yeah, I did. I did do a run through the other night because we're reading a new continuum for the summer, and I'm just trying to piece together what would be appropriate and not appropriate based on our current skill level.
And I will also say, I feel like sometimes with the students I have, I'm not really sure what kind of day they're going to have.
Sure.
Because if it's a really focused day, there's stuff I don't need to work on.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I need to gauge how they're playing today. So usually you can tell that by the warm up, and you can usually tell it by how they walk in the room. But
Yeah,
sometimes I need a little more feedback.
absolutely. Yep.
Work in progress.
Both of us, man. We're both 1,000 years old and getting better every day, I hope.
When you're green, you're growing.
Yep.
And when you're ripe, you rot.
I
Yep.
like that.
Yep.
Yeah. So we've given them a clear antecedent. They've now made the attempt, and it's time for us to tell them whether they did it right or not. My biggest piece of advice is just address what you asked them to do. Don't add the word but to anything. Just give them the direct feedback. Saxophones, I asked you to play that G sharp that time. You nailed it. Great job. I'm proud of you. It doesn't have to be saxophones. You nailed that G sharp. Oh, just be careful. Sometimes that G sharp key is really sticky and you've got to make sure it comes up in time for the next G, or otherwise it's going to be out again. Like, you don't need to give them extra information and get them right back to the next antecedent. To me, this sort of circles back to what you were talking about, that Friday afternoon on a nice day
Mhm.
practice. I don't see a difference in the, if you're worried about the amount of face time that a student is getting because it could be an off day, to me, this is a better way to do it. Because they're still getting the face time. If they're playing 40 minutes out of a 50-minute period because you're keeping your instructions short, or they're playing 40 minutes out of a 50-minute period because we're just doing run-throughs back to back, if the goal is making sure they're occupied, I think that the first choice is better. And I think you can do it. We just always step on our own feet because we over-explain and we give too much information.
Something that came to mind. It's
Mhm.
kind of a tangent, but talking about, because there are some times we need to talk.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, you've got announcements
Sure.
or things that are coming up that you need to deal with or whatever.
Mhm.
So, what are some ways that you can do stuff like that and not have it take away from rehearsal?
Number one, put it on the board, put it on the screen, whatever you have. Number two, get students used to checking the board or the screen at the beginning of rehearsal, at the end of rehearsal. There's lots of different ways I've seen folks be successful with that. There's a colleague, now I can't remember where she teaches, but I walked into Observer rehearsal one day, and she's amazing. And so what she did was she had the announcement about the whatever was coming up, whatever they were selling, wrapping paper, brownies, or whatever. And at the end of rehearsal, she turned the screen off so no one could see that specific announcement anymore. And then she had a pop quiz. What was the announcement on the screen today about the brownies or the wrapping paper or whatever? All of our students nailed it because it was just, that was part of their get into the classroom procedure. The Harry Wong thing, routines and procedures. Like if you build it in, it's just going to happen, and you reinforce it along the way.
And again, that's if you tie that into a little bit with behavior. I heard somebody describe it once that you're giving permission for everything they do in your room.
Yes.
Because if there's a behavior you don't like and you don't fix it, you're giving permission for that.
Yeah.
So if you go into these well-managed classrooms with master teachers, and we've done episodes on that stuff, like you have control over everything in your room most days.
Yeah.
So as a culture, that's a really great way to just don't let things go that you don't want to have.
Yeah, I mean, the behaviorists might call that approval error, right? By not addressing something, you're tacitly giving your approval. I agree with that, right? I was that way. I was a bit of a class clown when I was younger. I know it's hard to believe, but if it wasn't addressed, it was okay to me.
Yep.
And so, yeah. The only time that I like to go back and back and back and back and hit the same thing over again multiple times is if a student or a section or the whole band has shown promise on a technique, but it's not there yet. And I think I can get them to the finish line in that class period.
Yep.
Otherwise, it's good to just move on. So everything we've talked about so far is about teacher feedback, how we give feedback to our students from the podium or from the director's chair or whatever you have in your room. I also like to encourage everyone to think about where feedback can come from external to us. So can we ask our students to reflect themselves? Can we ask, if we're playing a chorale and you only have one marimba in your room and nothing else melodic, can we ask the percussionist to come up front, listen, and give feedback to the rest of the band? Can we ask students to go to an external third-party device for some feedback, right? We all do this every day, some of us, I shouldn't say we all. If you use tuners in your band room and each student has a tuner, or each student is expected to go to a tuner at some point, that's an external feedback device. If students record themselves and listen to themselves, that's external as well. It doesn't always have to be us. And I would encourage you to try to set up your band room so that students can get feedback from each other. Oftentimes, students are really, really insightful with what they have to say to each other. You as the teacher, though, have some work to do to set that up so that it's a healthy experience for everybody. But it's worth it, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and it just made me think of this too, sometimes I've heard people say you can save a lot on private lessons if you just listen to the original recording and record yourself playing something as a personal musician, and then listen to the difference between the two.
Yeah, I'd agree with that to a certain extent. The less experience you have, the younger you are on the instrument, the more direct feedback you're going to need from a professional who plays that instrument, because it might be a technique thing standing in your way. Yeah.
Cool.
So that's basically what I talked about at MMEA. We got into some scenarios and some Q&As, but
that's pretty awesome. So what are some things, we didn't prep for this, what are some things that you like when you see teachers teach? Like, what are some I wish everybody did that?
Oh, what are the,
yeah.
I couldn't tell you where I picked this up. It's something I intentionally do, but I doubt that I came up with it. I'm not that smart. When I give feedback to my students, if it's positive feedback, I try to use their names. If it's negative or corrective feedback, I use their instrument.
Yeah.
So I might say, John, that was an amazing high C, bravo, congratulations. But if the entire trumpet section just threw up all over the high C, I'm not going to say, John, that was terrible. I'm going to say, trumpets, let's try that again. I think your approach to that needs to be tweaked.
Yep.
I've seen that in the field work well. I think one thing we should try to teach more at undergraduate programs is personal organization. Here at the University of Maine, we're certainly trying to do more of that intentionally. Students know when you're disorganized. Students know when you don't have a plan for what's going to happen that day. And oftentimes that will leave them with feelings of I don't care about this class because the teacher doesn't care about this class,
Mhm.
or I don't care about the teacher because the teacher doesn't care about me.
Mm-hmm.
That leads to some breakdowns. And I think it's really important for all of us to remember that we're dealing with human beings, right? If I had a magic wand and I could change one thing in this world, the way that we teach band, it's that we stop teaching them to be cogs in a music making machine and start teaching them to make musical decisions on their own, because that's going to make everyone's group better.
Mm-hmm.
That's my soapbox. I
love it.
I think we stop seeing students for being students, and it's terrible. I've done it before, and I hate it. I also think we need to recognize when our students do amazing things,
Mm-hmm.
because they do. And even if it's not the thing that we wanted them to do at the beginning of the year, it's amazing. I mean, think about what we're asking our students to do. We're asking them to coordinate 1 million hand movements, or embouchure stuff, while they're reading this music notation, while they're listening to how they blend in with everyone else around. That's a lot of stuff we're putting on these kids' shoulders. And I think we fail ourselves and we fail our students when we fail to recognize how amazing they are.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.